Welcome to episode 112 of the Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. Today's Behavioral Economics Foundations episode is about the Ikea Effect. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. On today's Behavioral Economics Foundations episode, we're going to be talking about the Ikea Effect, as well as the effort heuristic. I loved the Ikea Effect concept since the moment I heard its name. It's such a quirky title, but so clear for what this concept is all about. In its most basic form, we value things that we put effort into more than things we don't. I'll talk about the details more and the nuances as we go through the episode, of course. And there are many more ways to use this concept than assembling your own furniture. But before we get to that, I want to do a quick shout out to Beck Weeks, co-founder of Peak, who participated in a fun game I started on Twitter recently, where I asked people to share a behavioral economics or behavioral science concept using only emojis. It was amazing how many responses there were and people playing along around the world. From Neil Hopkins in the UK to Abanita Chakraborty in India, Samuel Salzer in Sweden, to the team at Yale's Center for Consumer Insights, and many more. It was lots of fun. Thank you to everyone who's already participated. And if you want to check it out, put in guesses or share your own emoji behavioral economics concepts, please do. You can see everything from loss aversion and the sunk cost fallacy to the hot-cold empathy gap, nudges, relativity anchoring, and many more. The reason I gave Beck a specific shout out is that her emoji entry was for the Ikea Effect. She, of course, didn't know that it was going to be this week's episode, but it seemed timely and worth sharing. You'll find links to my original tweet and all the comments, as well as links to the accounts that got a shout out today in the show notes, which can be found within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/112. They are all fantastic folks who deserve a follow, as does everyone who participated in the game. So definitely go check it out. If you don't yet follow the Brainy Business on Twitter, please do. You can find me as the Brainy Biz, B-I-Z. And if you engage in a future conversation, you might just find yourself with a shout out on an episode too. In addition to all those Twitter links, you'll find fantastic articles and references to past episodes in the show notes, along with a freebie worksheet on the Ikea Effect. Are you already on the Brainy Business email list? If so, thank you. And this is a reminder that you got a direct link to the show notes and the Ikea Effect worksheet in the email you received from me on the Friday that this episode came out. If you're not yet on the list and would like to be, simply sign up for any freebie, including the one for this episode, and you'll be automatically added. Those in the States can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy, B-R-A-I-N-Y, to 33777. You'll be automatically added to the list and get access to a super secret page with over 50 freebies as a thank you. Now, let's dig in on the Ikea Effect. As I've already mentioned, the core of this concept is that when people have an opportunity to build something themselves, when they put some effort in, they will value that thing higher than something they didn't build. This concept gets its name, of course, from IKEA furniture, which you assemble yourself. And looking at my own wonky table, I would value it higher than something built by someone else because I'm aware of the work that went into creating it. And it doesn't really matter if theirs technically looks better or is more expertly assembled, as you'll hear with some of the examples and studies throughout this episode. Some studies have attributed this to the pride felt when assembling something yourself. And that's part of it, but it isn't the whole story. This is also different than the power of touch, which has its episode linked in the show notes, and from the endowment effect, which I have touched on in the episodes on change management, what is value, and it's also closely related to loss aversion. As I've been doing a lot more presentations on change management in the brain recently, do keep an eye out for episodes on the endowment effect and the status quo bias very soon. For our purposes here, there is a link to an article in the show notes called Anomalies, the Endowment Effect, Loss Aversion, and Status Quo Bias, which was authored by Nobel laureates Kahneman and Thaler along with Jack Netsch. The endowment effect is the phenomena in our brains where simply owning something causes us to find more worth in it than what other people see in it, or its stated price. The example from the study talks about a group of participants. Half were given $2 cash, and the other half were given a lottery ticket worth $2, and they were assigned completely at random. After a period of time in which the lottery tickets were not cashed, the participants were given the opportunity to switch. And very few did. Why? If you were given the lottery ticket, your brain has started to factor in the potential winnings into calculation of how much that item is worth to you. This potential means it exceeds the $2 price tag. If you are given the cash, you see that as a solid, stable amount. You know what you can do with $2 and what it can get for you. The lottery ticket has a very slim chance of being worth anything. It's most likely a worthless piece of paper, whereas your cash has remained the same, so it wouldn't be worth the gamble to give up the sure thing for the lottery ticket. Being endowed with something, owning it, causes people to see value in its potential, which meant how much it was worth in their mind exceeded the price, and the potential cost of giving it up and settling on the other item would be a loss. And as we know, people are averse to losing things. It may seem on the surface like the Ikea effect is just an extension of the endowment effect, but studies have been done and shown that they are actually different. Even when people built something and were told they could not keep it, they still valued the item they made higher than those made by someone else. In one study, people were tasked with making origami cranes or frogs. There was one group of builders who had as much time as they needed to build their origami, and they were all novices. So these were not fancily put together origami frogs or cranes. After completion, they had an opportunity to bid on what they would pay for it. And a standard way groups will pretty much learn the value is to say that you can bid up to a certain amount. In this case, it was $1. And then a random number will be drawn with all the possible valuations. If your bid is equal to or higher than that number, you get to keep it. If your bid is less, you can't have it. So the one group built their origami and had a chance to write down their bid for the item. There was a second group of non-builders who went through the same bidding process for the items built by the novice builders, as well as some origami made by expert folders to do a comparison. The non-builders valued the expert origami at 27 cents on average, and the ones built by the non-experts at a mere 5 cents, basically a worthless piece of paper. But what did the builders think of their own creations? They valued them nearly 5 times higher than non-builders. The average value was 23 cents, which was almost as much as the non-builders were willing to pay for the expertly folded origami. A separate group was tested to ensure the results weren't just based on a willingness to buy something they wanted to keep for themselves versus true value. When asked what they thought others would pay for their creations, this second group predicted that people would pay 21 cents, which is much higher than the meager 5 cents people would actually pay. This phenomenon makes it clear why people think their own artwork is worth more than people are willing to pay for it, or why they ask for a lot more money than their home is worth if they put a lot of sweat equity into creating it. We tend to think that our effort ties into the direct value and that something we spent a lot of time on is worth more to everyone else as well. Studies have shown that people expect to get higher grades for papers they spent more time writing. While there is often a correlation between these two items and effort can result in a higher grade, that isn't always the case. Maybe someone really got a concept and wrote a great paper quickly, while in another week, they had a really hard time understanding the concept and they were struggling to make leaps between items, so it took them longer to understand the foundation. Many students have argued with a professor saying something like, "But I worked so hard. How could I possibly get a C?" The reason behind this is the Ikea effect. And it's been found that we use effort as a guide for value even when we're not the ones putting in the work. This is known as the effort heuristic, which has found that even when we don't have direct memory of the work in question, for example, we don't do it ourselves, we still connect effort and quality together. A research paper linked for you in the show notes did a series of tests with various pieces of art, poems, paintings, and suits of armor. When people believed that a poem took 18 hours to complete, they thought it was better and worth more money than people who were showed a poem that they told took only 4 hours. It was the same poem in both conditions, and the duration of time to create it were not the only facts they were told. They were assigned to take notes about the name of the author, his age at the time of writing the poem, the title, and the time it took to write, which was the only thing that changed between the conditions. In the 4-hour condition, people said the value was $50, while the 18-hour version they valued nearly double at $95 for the same exact poem. I found it interesting that the liking score was not proportionately higher in the high effort condition. People rated the quality of the 4-hour poem as 5.84 on a scale of 1 to 11, and it went up to a 6.43 for the 18-hour version. That means that while you were doubling in the value of what they thought people would pay for it, people didn't necessarily like it that much more. Though it was a higher liking score, it was nowhere near as high as the difference between the amount that they thought someone would pay for it. In the second study, they had participants compare two paintings from the same artist, 12 lines and Big Abstract. They were told the paintings took either 4 or 26 hours to complete, and the assignment of the time to complete was at random. So half were told that Big Abstract took 4 hours and 12 lines took 26 hours, and the others were told the opposite. Again, whichever painting they were told took more time to complete was the one people tended to like more, and they valued it higher. And in this condition, they also brought in self-identified art experts to participate separately from novices. And they had the same effect. The experts also changed their valuations of which were higher quality based on the effort they were told it took to complete the painting. When looking at Big Abstract, the valuation would have made a big difference to the bottom line of the artist. When people thought it only took 4 hours to complete, it was valued at $650. When people thought it took 26 hours to complete, they valued it at $1,500, nearly triple what they thought when it took only 4 hours. The last study in this paper looked at medieval suits of armor. They were actually being shown the exact same armor both times, but one version had a crystal clear image, so you could see all the detail and extra etching. The other one they saw was a little blurry, so the detail was hidden, and people were either told it took 15 hours or 110 hours to complete. So one person might have seen the low-resolution image and was told it took 110 hours. Another person saw the low-res image and was told it took 15 hours. The next would see a high-res image and was told it took 110 hours, and the final saw the high-res image and was told it took 15 hours. The clear images got higher ratings of value, but this part of the study was also looking at how ambiguous quality would impact the valuations, making effort even more important. So let me explain what that means. When the image being shown is of high resolution, you can see the quality. And so that can impact the valuation in addition to the number of hours you were told it took to create. People rated the 15-hour condition of the high resolution image with a quality rating of 6.16, compared to a 6.55 when they thought it took 110 hours. Not a huge move between them, but still a positive momentum. When the same suit of armor was shown in a low-res image, so all the fine etching was lost in the picture, people rated it as a 4.18 on the quality scale when they were told it took only 15 hours to create. So that's a full 2 points lower. So from 6.16 down to 4.18 when it's the 15-hour condition. But when they were told it took 110 hours, it jumped to a 5.64, much closer to the high-resolution images quality scores. When the quality can't be easily determined by our eyes, other pieces of information will guide the brain's determination of value. And in this case, the perception of effort makes people think there must be more quality. This series of experiments shows that we believe that effort results in higher quality, even when we didn't put in that effort ourselves. I really love that the article went on to include a story about Jackson Pollock. Personally, I'm a huge fan of his paintings, but his drip method wasn't impressive to the art critics and public of the 1940s when he emerged on the scene. Many people hated them and thought they were not really art or a painting, that there was no technique shown in them, and people thought, incorrectly, that they or their children could recreate them in a few minutes with some loose paint and a license to wave their arms without regard for the mess that they would be making. As the article says, what many assumed was the result of thoughtless splattering of paint onto canvas was in fact a slow, deliberate, and exhausting process, often requiring weeks, even months of hard work. And the most important thing for our discussion here is that effort was used to defend its quality. And as the noted historian Leo Steinberg put it, questions as to the validity of Pollock's work, though they remain perfectly good in theory, are simply blasted out of relevance by these manifestations of Herculean effort, this evidence of mortal struggle between the man and his art. Insight into the intense process changed people's minds about Pollock and his artwork. This is the effort heuristic in action. And it is important to note here that as this episode is mostly about the Ikea effect, the effort heuristic is not exactly the same thing, as you can hopefully see from the discussion here. The Ikea effect says that we value things higher when we put effort into them. So the effort heuristic is present with our own Ikea effects. But when someone else is putting in the work, it can trigger the effort heuristic without being the Ikea effect. Before moving on to some other examples, I want to give you some tips for how this can be used in your business. In my opinion, this helps to show why it's so difficult to bill by the hour. When you break down your project into individual hours, it's often going to be less than where someone might think it's a Herculean effort, like our Pollock painting. When you're exchanging dollars for hours, it reduces the effort to each 60-minute increment. On a project, people can make their own assumptions of the total number of hours included in getting the work done, which may be based on how long it took them to do something themselves in the past. So if it takes me 4 hours to go in and do my accounting stuff in a way that's incredibly agonizing and has additional mental toil outside of the direct work, so it's really more like 8 wasted hours each month, if someone was to say they could do this for me for $250 a month or $500 or whatever, I can look at my own time and opportunity costs to determine if it's worth it for me. When they say, oh, that'll only take me 2 hours to complete, and they're at $125 an hour, it feels like there might be less work going into it, and we can conveniently forget all the hours of training that got them their level of expertise. I'm actually paying for 2 hours plus the countless hours of training and knowledge that they've gained over the years. Nikki Rausch, whom I've interviewed on episode 96, has a great story about a little red wrench. I've linked to the full story in the show notes, but essentially a cruise ship isn't able to get out of port. The captain is panicked and worried about giving all these passengers their money back, so he tells the crew to call the retired engineer and pay him anything he wants to get the engine running. The engineer shows up with no toolbox, just a small red-handled wrench in his shirt pocket. He looks and listens for 5 minutes, then takes the little red-handled wrench and taps 3 times on the engine. He tells them to try again, and to everyone else's surprise, the ship starts. Fast forward to the invoice showing up, which was for $13,000, which the captain thinks must be a mistake. He was told by the crew it took the engineer only 5 minutes, so he asks for an itemized bill, and it returned with 2 line items. 1. Red-handled wrench, $5. 2. Knowing where to tap, $12,995. For things like artwork, there's a lot of hidden time and talent that goes into the piece, something people might think they could have done themselves due to overconfidence bias and optimism bias. When someone's buying a crafted item, being able to call out how long it took to make can help justify the value, just like Jackson Pollock. Using simple words like handcrafted, or that a wedding dress is all hand-beaded, or that something is assembled by hand, all help to trigger the effort heuristic and can work in your favor. People value the time someone puts in more than machines in many cases. But when you're putting a value on your time, it's really hard to get individual hours to reflect your expertise and the true effort you've put into your career. The value you provide is often in the time you're saving them. Knowing what that is worth is a better way to find what you should charge than your total number of hours put in. Especially as your rates increase, this can be more difficult for people than a project value, where they don't know the exact number of hours going in. So to sum all of that up, it's just important to know when you're thinking about your pricing strategy, just look at what type of business you're in and how the value of time can either work for you or against you as you determine how you're pricing and setting things up for your clients. The other side of the Ikea effect is knowing that people actually like to put in effort for things. We tend to assume that people would prefer to do nothing, get everything fully assembled and complete, and they would likely tell us that on a survey because people don't really know what they want most of the time. But as it turns out, when you remove all the effort, sometimes people will rebel and not buy. Have you ever wondered why you need to add an egg and oil to instant cake mix? Today, we might say, why can't they find a way to include everything in the box? The truth is, they did, and no one would buy them. When instant cake mix was first introduced back in the 1950s, there was nothing to add but water, and housewives didn't want them. It made it too easy. Their skills were undervalued, and it felt like a lie. They, of course, couldn't consciously articulate that this was the problem, but when it didn't sell, the company looked back to see what they should do to change this. Removing the powdered egg from the mix so people had to add it themselves did the trick, and soon box cake mix became the norm, and most people don't even know how to make cakes from scratch. It still feels like you're making cake or cookies when you use a box, but not quite as much as when you do it from scratch. And we value when people make things from scratch higher, which is why we will pay more for them than if people were selling box cake mix cakes at a bakery. As an avid baker myself, I'm always inclined to say I made something from scratch when that's the case. The effort feels like it needs to be rewarded. Humans aren't the only animals who value putting in effort. When presented with 2 food options, one that's just an open, easily accessed bowl, and another that requires some level of work to get their food, rats and birds will choose the work over the freely accessible bowl. We're motivated by feeling like we did something, like we earned it, whatever it is. We still like convenience to a point, but when it's all done for us, we don't value the thing as much. Consider Build-A-Bear, which was a great example from one of the academic articles in the show notes. Build-A-Bear Workshop puts the labor of creating the bear on the customer. Logically, it should cost less if you put it together yourself, but people actually pay more for the custom bear they create than one that's produced on a factory line. or others who pay to take on someone else's job for a week, those adult camps essentially where you're doing the work of a farmer or a chef, paying for the opportunity to make things yourself. Look at the box meals that have become popular in recent years, like HelloFresh or Blue Apron. The company is able to buy the ingredients in bulk, so it costs much less than if I was to buy them myself. And the amount they send me is a smaller portion than I would have bought myself. It's pre-measured for me, and I can simply chop and throw it in a pan. And some of them make it so you don't even need to chop the ingredients. It feels like I made it all fresh, but I didn't have to do all the work of finding the recipe, which is probably available for free somewhere online, and buying the ingredients at the store. For this luxury, I pay a premium on the ingredients, make it myself, and am happy to pay more for it. But it's important that you don't make it too hard so that the project doesn't get completed. Studies have gone on to show that when people don't finish whatever the project is, whether it's because it was too hard or because they were told to stop and the item was still super easy to finish, like only 2 really tiny steps left, the IKEA effect doesn't come into play and can actually have a negative impact resulting in regret. So you want to ensure your customers will finish whatever they buy from you and that it isn't too difficult. Similarly, taking something apart can completely wash away the effects of the IKEA effect. Building a Lego set of only 10 to 12 pieces doesn't take more than a few minutes. It's easy to do. When given a set to assemble and a partner was making something else of similar size, people valued their items twice as much as those made by the other person, unless they were told to take them apart first. Building and then unbuilding the Lego made it so they valued it the same as the other person's build. There's no customization available, and it would have only taken a few moments to put it back together later. But the value of the IKEA effect was completely wiped away once they took the thing apart. Some assembly required on items can help people to feel that they did something, had an opportunity to demonstrate their own competence, and value the item they got more highly than if it came fully assembled. The cool thing is, you can go both ways on valuation. I've already shown you how you can use it to make it so people feel good about paying more for their buys than if they got the ingredients themselves, like HelloFresh or Build-A-Bear. This could also be used, say, if you wanted to sell monthly kits with art supplies and instructions for how to complete the project, or any number of conveniences that allow someone to be creative and use a little skill. In these cases, people are often willing to pay more. But you can also go the other way, like the namesake of this concept, and look at IKEA. In this scenario, people get to feel like they're smart and savvy shoppers buying at a discount. And they get the benefit of feeling like they did something in assembling their table or bunk beds for the kids or whatever it is that they bought. Whichever model you choose, make sure you give your customers the steps they need to be successful and assume that they're buying a kit for a reason. If they were confident in painting a masterpiece on their own, they wouldn't buy a paint by number. If they knew how to build a custom table, they wouldn't go to IKEA. The research shows it's best to give a little creativity along with a lot of guidance to ensure people will complete the task, be more satisfied with the end result, and get the full benefits of the IKEA effect. For the paint by number example, maybe you give recommendations for the colors to use to have it look like the intended work of art, but also provide some random colors with recommendations for changing things up. You could include 3 versions where an expert painted using their own color combinations to give them some creative examples and to see what they might want to emulate, structure, and creativity together. This also gives you an opportunity to leverage another concept, social proof, which was the focus of episode 87, if you feature creative items that are made by other customers. It shows that you have a lot of people who use and love your kits while helping this new customer to get some guidance and creativity. Win, win, win. And the good news is, this doesn't just have to be used for product businesses. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I talk about this concept in my presentations on change management as well. You've probably heard that people are more likely to be on board with projects or opportunities that they had a hand in creating. If you've ever thought that it was silly or wondered why, the IKEA effect is a big reason. When you're looking to introduce a change and just throwing it at someone, they have no ownership of it. They didn't put any effort in, so they don't value it that much. When they're able to help build it, even just a little bit, it can make all the difference in whether they are a productive member of the team or a big hindrance you need to help the team get over. And I do want to insert one little caveat here. When you're working on assembling an item, it's okay to have it so that the first steps are completed and the person is completing the item through to the end with the IKEA effect. If you, though, have them only start making something and then they don't finish it or someone else finishes that assembly process, it can feel like they didn't get the full benefit of the IKEA effect because they didn't create that final outcome. And this has been shown in children as young as 5 years old. When you're looking at a work scenario, it's kind of the opposite. So it can be really valuable to let someone have insight very early on in a project where they're able to influence where the project goes down the line. And you can still say, so-and-so talked about this thing, which we were able to implement in this way. So asking them up front is actually very valuable, even if they aren't in that tactical implementation process. They can still be part of that and it can be productive and a good use of the IKEA effect, but you can also only have them come in at the beginning and still get that value. And if there are people on your team who are particularly resistant to change, look for opportunities to include them as early as possible in the next project and make sure it is something where you can show them that the suggestions they made or ideas they had were included whenever possible. Remember, if you ask them and don't include their feedback, it can actually end up worse than if you don't ask at all, because it would be triggering sort of a confirmation bias that the company doesn't actually care about me or my opinions. And look, they asked, but for no reason because they wouldn't implement anything that I suggested. So just be selective when you pick the projects that you're asking for feedback on to make sure that you can actually implement the things that those folks are suggesting. And this is another point where social proof can really come into play. At one of my corporate jobs, we used to ask for employee ideas and feedback all the time. And maybe your company does this too. If you as an employee throw ideas into the abyss and no one ever hears about them ever again, it isn't very motivating, just like that confirmation bias problem I was talking about a second ago. But what about when you suggest an idea and the company makes a big deal about it, celebrating that person for their great idea? We would have postings on our intranet that would say things like, "Thanks so much to Susie Q, who suggested we switch to this new process, which we estimate will save the company $10,000 this year. Thanks for the great suggestion, Susie. We love that you're part of this team." That's the IKEA effect plus social proof, which is a big win. And I want to note this is very similar to some examples that Dr. Gleb Sipersky gave on last week's episode when we were talking about incentivizing engineers to participate in a marketing process. Monetary incentives were not the same as being named Employee of the Month when you participated in the marketing efforts. So seeing how you can align incentives is important as well. And I have linked to that interview with Gleb from last week in the show notes, as well as the episode on incentives and confirmation bias. When you line up your incentives in this way with the IKEA effect and social proof, it can help your employees look for opportunities to bring on change themselves and be more open to changes when they come. Fostering a culture of change doesn't have to be difficult, and the IKEA effect can make it a little easier. As I said, I've been doing a lot of presentations to organizations of all sizes about the brain and change management, or understanding the brain to be a better communicator, and this has been a huge request during these pandemic times. In a recent presentation, one attendee from a Fortune 10 company said, "Thank you so much for providing this awesome speaker. It was truly the most informative, productive 1.5-hour seminar I've ever experienced at this company. So well prepared, delivered with politely controlled interaction that didn't let the discussion get overwhelmed or distracted, and truly valuable information that makes me want to stop and consider the trifecta before sending my next meeting invitation or making my next proposal. I eagerly look forward to the next session, and I don't envy you having to schedule the next speaker. Melina is going to be a hard act to follow. Such awesome and kind feedback from that attendee. If you're interested in a presentation like that one or consulting work to help implement change management or learning about unconscious bias in the workplace, send me an email, melina@thebrainybusiness.com. And as a reminder, the show notes for the episode have links to a bunch of articles to help you think of more ways to apply the Ikea Effect and effort heuristic into your life and business. You'll also find links to related past episodes, including social proof, change management, loss aversion, and more. It's all waiting for you along with your free Ikea Effect worksheet at thebrainybusiness.com/112. And if you enjoyed this episode on the Ikea Effect and learned something new, please let me know. Find and connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as The Brainy Biz and share your thoughts about this amazing bias. How might you use it in business? How has it caused you problems or worked for you in the past? Did it just get you thinking differently? I'd love to hear about it. So again, find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as The Brainy Biz so we can chat about this episode and others. And as you heard, when you do chat with me on the socials, you might just find yourself featured on a future episode of the show. I look forward to chatting with you, yes, you, very soon. And just like that, episode 112 on the Ikea Effect is done. Next week on episode 113, I'm interviewing two awesome guys from the company Colu to talk about how they're using behavioral science to help small businesses generate traffic around the world and partnering with cities to help keep economies moving positively during the pandemic. It's an intriguing and very timely episode. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.